So we've been talking about evolution, and we're going to be talking more about natural selection. But before we do, I wanted to make the point again that this thing that we call evolution, it has nothing to do with X-Men. Exactly. Um, it is about mutation causing a variation in alleles, which are, we now know from the 2 weeks before the lab midterm, that alleles are different molecular forms of a gene. A mutation that creates an allele, if it's an adaptive allele, then it will create a protein that behaves somewhat differently. In the pigs in the symbio, the black pigs, their allele for making that MCR1, instead of behaving normally, it would just, what am I doing? It would stay on all the time. And that's what caused pigs to be black in that. So actually, in the case of the pigs, the black pigs had a mutation. So that would be an example of an allele. And then over time, alleles that produce the most successful phenotypes, phenotype, we very often say what the animal looks like. Humans are really visual, so we're always talking about what things look like. But the truth is, as I'm going to show you later, that there's a very successful allele in humans that causes us to be, if you're lucky enough to have it, to be resistant to HIV infection. Okay, so it's not always what things look like. And less successful alleles will become less common. So we're really thinking about alleles. Now, let me give you an example. This is pages 300 to 302 in your textbook. Okay, I don't know if I've got the latest edition of the textbook. So, but here you can see that if there are different alleles for how fast rabbits can run, and then if you introduce a very fast predator like a fox, so a predator that doesn't like sneak up on things and pounce on them, but a predator that chases them, that's very fast, then being a rabbit that is very, very fast, that allele would be very adaptive. And so over time, you would have more and more fast rabbits in the population and fewer slower rabbits in the population. Now, you probably should notice that the rabbits of the world are not necessarily all super fast. If this is true, then why aren't they all just super fast? And the truth is that alleles very seldom have got a purely positive or a purely negative effect. For example, in rabbits, the allele that allows them to be very fast means that they need more food in order to survive. So when times are great and there's plenty of food in the environment, being a fast rabbit is going to allow you to reproduce more, and there will be more fast rabbits born in the next generation. But when there is a famine and there's not much food around, being a slow rabbit suddenly is advantage. And then after a famine, you will see more of the slow rabbits in the population. There are some places on the planet where this adaptation for speed seems to have just gone unchecked, and that is on the plains of Africa, where the two fastest animals live. So the fastest animal, it depends on what you're talking about, but the two fastest animals are the impala, which is a type of antelope, and its predator, the cheetah. Those are the two fastest mammals on the planet. And the cheetah actually gets faster, but can't run very far. The impala doesn't get quite as fast, but can run farther at that fast rate. So it's kind of neck and neck for those two guys. I wanted to make the point that evolution only happens in populations, right? The smallest biological unit that can evolve is a population. And why? Because evolution is the change in allelic frequency in a population over time. If there is a mutation in an individual that makes that individual more adaptive, like let's just imagine I've got a mutation that allows me to fly, all right? That is cool, and that is a great mutation, but that would not be considered evolution because evolution is a change in the allelic frequencies of populations over time. Let's look at these two examples. All right. Let's imagine that there is a California ground squirrel population that lives here and a California ground squirrel population that lives here. There is water, ocean, between these two populations. So we would consider these two individual populations, even though they're all the same species of squirrel. If I introduce Mr. Squirrel from here to Mrs. Squirrel over here, they could reproduce just fine. So they're not two different populations because they're two different species. Would be two different populations because they simply cannot reproduce with each other because they're not living in the same place at the same time. So that's what a population is. And a population is the smallest biological unit that can evolve. There was a time on planet Earth where you could have considered humans to have multiple populations. And when humans had multiple populations, there was some natural selection for different physical traits. For example, populations of humans that lived in very far northern climates, you will learn that they are very likely to be able to digest milk more than populations of humans in other areas. There were different kind of natural selection pressures. Now, however, we would consider the entire Earth population of humans to be a single population just because we can move around so easily. Yes, individuals do not evolve. You can have a mutation in an individual, but they do not evolve except for in that Dr. Phil, Oprah Winfrey kind of sense of the word, okay? Only populations evolve. And populations are considered to have what is called a gene pool. The gene pool is all of the alleles of all of the individuals that make up a population. And at this point, when we met in real life, I very often would say, okay, let's imagine that 2020 goes super badly and the rest of the world has been killed off, okay? Then we would be the only population of humans. And whatever alleles we have, that would be our gene pool. And at that time, I might look around the room and I might say, none of us has got an allele to create someone who's 6'6", right? That would be an allele that we just don't have. And it's not just things that you look at, but blood types and what your immune system does. All of those things all are characterized by alleles. And so those would be the alleles in our gene pool. By the way, killing off the whole population so there's just a small number of individuals, like even if you killed off the entire world population, you were just left with Cerritos College, that would be called a bottleneck. And bottlenecks will drive the number of alleles in a gene pool so small that randomness can have a significant effect on the allelic frequency in that population. Usually we're dealing with gene pools and populations that are big enough that randomness is not an important factor in evolution, but we'll talk about an example where they are. So yeah, different alleles. And you can see, oh, they're the same. Oh, this one's different in that amino acid. How's one different from, oh, this one's different in that one. All right, so different alleles. We're going to talk about some subcategories or what are known as microevolution. We describe something as microevolution when it happens in a time scale that we can, as scientists, observe and document. So microevolution subcategories are genetic drift, migration, uh, the effect of mutations, and then we can see it with natural selection. It really depends on the whether we can observe the evolution of a species. Really depends on how frequently they reproduce. For example, we're not going to be able to observe the evolution of elephants because it takes them like 30 years before they start to reproduce, right? Whereas with fruit flies, it takes them a couple of days. So we can watch that and measure that scientifically. Let's start by talking a little bit more about bottlenecks. I told you that that if 2020 went really badly, and the only people that survived were people that were registered at Cerritos College, we would suddenly have a very small population of humans on planet Earth, and whatever was in our gene pool, that would be it. Would our gene pool reflect everything? Undoubtedly not, right? Because we would have a very small number of people, and the selection wouldn't be truly random. There are very few people registered in Cerritos College that necessarily have Inuit genetics. There are very few people registered at not none, but very few people registered at Cerritos College that have got significant, perhaps, Maori genetics or Watusi genetics, for example, right? We would have a lot of some genes and fewer of others. When this happens in nature, we call it a bottleneck. A bottleneck is a severe reduction in population size. Now, if I told you that out of all the world, only the people at Cerritos College have survived, you would know that that had to be a relatively random event. It wouldn't be because we had an allele that made us more likely to survive, I don't know, COVID-19. It would be because some event happened and it's just never hit Cerritos College, right? It would be random. Bottlenecks very often are random. Um, if, for example, a volcano erupts and it goes down a mountainside and it kills 90% of the squirrels that lived on that mountainside, it was just dumb luck, whether a squirrel was in the right place or the wrong place. So the fact that a squirrel survives is not evidence that it's got Darwinian fitness. Therefore, that would be a random event and it would not be due to natural selection. Right? Very small populations are at significant risk for what is called genetic drift. We'll talk about that. Humans are very often the cause of bottlenecks and dramatic reductions in population sizes. The elephant seal is a really huge, fat, cold water mammal. And its population was hunted down to just 20 individuals, mostly in the 1800s. When we quit relying on blubber for lighting up the lamps in our homes, the population of elephant seals was allowed to rebound, and now it's up to about 30,000 elephant seals or so, right? However, when they got hunted down to just 20, it was probably just 20 individuals that just happened to be living in a part of the coastline where it was very difficult for a boat to get to, or from out at sea, you couldn't tell that there was a cove there at all, right? So it was just dumb luck. Now, if we look at the 30,000 individuals, we will see that there is only one allele for 24 different genes. There are 24 different genes where every seal, elephant seal on the planet has got exactly the same allele because no one has had a mutation to it yet. That wild cat called the cheetah has faced a couple of bottlenecks, one for hunting and we think one for a reason that we don't know yet. but they are so genetically similar to each other that any cheetah on the planet can receive an organ transplant from any cheetah on the planet. That's evidence that there was a dramatic bottleneck. Okay. All right. Bottlenecks can be random rather than natural selection. So this would be an example that here are all the people on the planet, and here would be an example of the alleles for that gene if it was just people at Cerritos College. So we would have very little of this green allele. Maybe we'd have one person that had the purple allele, lots of the blue allele, right? That would be an example of a bottleneck. And I told you that humans very often cause bottlenecks. This is the American bison. A bison is not technically a buffalo, so we're supposed to quit calling them that. But the American bison once was, it's hard, it would be very difficult for me to give you an analogy for how abundant bison were in the United States before humans just started killing them for no reason. Even when Native Americans were using them as a significant food source, there still were just millions and millions and millions of these guys. And then humans invented not just guns, but Gatling guns, the old-fashioned machine guns, and this is what happened. These gentlemen with their jaunty caps are standing on a hill made of skulls of bison, partly to starve the Native Americans that were living in the United States, and partly because people thought it was tremendous fun. They would simply go to herds of bison and just mow them down with Gatling guns. And the bison had no natural defense against that. Their normal behavior against being attacked was to have the strongest animals on the outside, protecting the injured and the weaker ones. And that simply led to the destruction of entire herds like this that people rounded up. These are just their skulls in order to make entire hills. Let's not do that anymore. We will start here at the beginning of our next video.